Our first speaker tonight is Len Holtz, and he is the president of the Historic Congregation Adas Israel, which, as you may know, now functions as a cemetery organization, but has deep roots in Hartford. He's also the executive director of the Hebrew Funeral Association, following in the footsteps of his father, Herman Holtz, who I believe founded that association, and also served in that capacity with Adas Israel for a large part of his life. So Len's ties go back to childhood, and his family ties, as you may know, in Hartford back to the Civil War, and we're very fortunate to have him with us tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my family goes back to Hartford when my great-grandfather fought in the Civil War in a New York regiment, 39th New York Volunteer Infantry, came to Hartford right after the Civil War. And he shortly thereafter married the daughter of the, ultimately the daughter of the early president of the congregation Adas Israel. My father, just a little correction for Beth, my father ran the Hebrew Funeral Association, which actually started in 1898, the same year that the congregation Adas Israel on Market Street was formally dedicated, although the congregation Adas Israel had its early beginnings in 1872 on Front Street, well, Pleasant and then Front Street. And then in 1898, they had a formal dedication of the synagogue. And just over my shoulder was at the pinnacle of the congregation Adas Israel on Market Street. That was the Star of David, the Magen David, that was at the very top of that building, which was unfortunately condemned in 1963 due to years of wear and damage from the floods. But that is one of the many relics that I have from that congregation Adas Israel. And the cemeteries have been under my family's inspection, maintenance, responsibility, going all the way back to Herman Holtz, the Civil War vet. And I have many artifacts. Actually, the stand that I'm speaking from is one of what was known as a stender, a prayer stand from the Market Street Synagogue, Adas Israel. So I've been following in the footsteps now for 4 generations of taking responsibility for the cemeteries of the Adas Israel, which started at Zion Hill, the area in Hartford known as the Zion Hill area, which has several Jewish cemeteries as well as other cemeteries that are part of the city, and then responsibility for the Tower Avenue area cemeteries, which were the newer areas that the congregation Adas Israel moved to, which are opposite Keeney Park. The history of the Jewish presence in Hartford, in 1659, the first Jews arrived in Hartford, and they were itinerant peddlers and were not allowed to live permanently in Hartford. However, these laws were not enforced vigorously, and many Jewish peddlers were permitted to stay and then establish permanent businesses. Now, coincidentally, I have a funeral tomorrow, Friday, at an old cemetery on Garden Street, originally known as the Hebrew Peddlers Association, then Hebrew Merchants Association. But there are many of those cemeteries that reflect those early Jewish individuals coming to this greater Hartford community. And then in 1843, the Connecticut General Assembly approved a petition which provided that Jews who desire to unite and form religious societies shall have the same rights, powers, and privileges which are given to Christians of every denomination. And that really then began the proliferation of Jewish cemeteries based on different organizations, some reflecting the shtetls that people lived in, came from. And the cemeteries, there are about 85 of those cemeteries, old cemeteries of various organizations that now exist and are between the Zion Hill and the Tower Avenue and another area known as Mall Avenue in Hartford, and then the Old North area. But by 1995, many of the members who were integral to maintenance and oversight of those cemeteries had passed on. The increasing expenses of maintaining the cemeteries depleted most of their finances. This situation was also happening to the adjoining cemeteries of other associations, and the cemeteries were deteriorating to the lack of maintenance. In 1995, I'll also share with you, there was a great, and I think Louis Goldfarb is in with us on this session, and I have to thank him for putting together, and I believe this was 1995. Louis, if you can hear me, or no, okay, you can't hear me. Okay, but a book which I could always consider a valuable resource. Louis Goldfarb and Rabbi Edward Cohn put together, which lists all of the Jews that are buried in these cemeteries that I'm describing, and it lists the history of the cemeteries, of the names of the cemeteries, old names. So if anyone is going to start getting a knowledge of Jewish cemeteries, this is a fundamental book. Before this book, there was another book which I still use in a significant way, which was the Hartford Jews, 1659 to 1670. This is by Rabbi Morris Silverman. It's an incredible research book for the history of Jewish families in the early cemeteries and activities of Greater Hartford. So again, for those beginning their knowledge and quest for more information, these two books represent many of the source material that I've used over the years. The area known as Zion Hill Cemetery, which has Ward and Affleck and Zion Street as boundaries, was established circa 1840 on a low hill that once was the Babcock Farm. At the time, the top of the hill provided views to the Connecticut River, Rocky Hill, and Talcott Mountain in Simsbury. Established during the time of the rural cemetery movement, which had become popular in the mid-1800s, the cemetery was envisioned as a rural enclave with abundant trees and fresh air. The southern portion of the cemetery was added in the early 1900s and is known as the Mount Pleasant addition. Prominent at the high point of the property is the Captain Henry Barnard site. In 1920, prominent Hartford architect Russell Baker designed the office area building that was up there. Zion Hill Cemetery now is the final resting place of over 200 Civil War veterans. My Civil War great-grandfather's wife, Rosa Price Holtz, is buried there alone because my Civil War veteran great-grandfather had a tragic accident when he was meeting with a group of Civil War veterans in New London. So he was hit by a train. Train accidents like that weren't that uncommon, crossing the tracks. And he was buried quickly in a Jewish cemetery in Waterford. So he rests with a Civil War monument in the Waterford Jewish Cemetery, and his wife rests in the Adas Israel Cemetery at Zion Hill, as do my grandparents. My parents rest in the Adas Israel Cemetery on Tower Avenue. And so now I'm continuing in that family legacy of overseeing these cemeteries. Also at the Zion Hill Cemetery in the Beth Israel, there is the matron Beatrice Fox Auerbach, president of the legendary G. Fox and Company department stores. There are many examples of the stories of the individuals who made up the Hartford Jewish community. Uniquely at the Beth Israel Cemetery at what's known as the Zion Hill area, there's a Morgenstern mausoleum. There's an Auerbach mausoleum, another mausoleum to the Hartman Newfield family, to the Blumenthal family, the Weiss family, and there's a unique mausoleum at the Adas Israel Cemetery at Zion Hill. There's only one of its kind, and while earth burial occurred for the great rabbi of the Adas Israel, Rabbi Sema Hoffenberg, a building or structure, mausoleum type structure, was built over it. That structure exists today. There are stories of the individuals from the great Hartford circus fire. And just by, again, coincidence, but when you're a funeral director, there are many ties to the history of Hartford. And just a couple of weeks ago, I buried the nephew of one of the circus fire victims, Esther Edith Hoffman Cavalier. She died in the circus fire along with her 6-year-old daughter, Sandra. And so I had that burial of Sheldon Hoffman, and the moment was even more reflective because across the way was Sophie Tucker's monument, a great musical performing talent of Hartford, radio, early theater, stage. There are many examples. There's an example of a very unique plot, probably the only one of its kind in Connecticut. There's a plot at the Beth David Cemetery that the Rome plot has about 60 graves assigned to that one family. It's a very unique plot, but there are many stories of those individuals who made up Hartford. Now, there are many examples of, as I mentioned, Civil War veterans, World War I, World War II. The Jewish War veterans have a Sergeant John J. Levitow post. It used to be known as the Laurel Post 45, but it reflects a Medal of Honor Jewish War veteran. While he's not buried in the Hartford area, he's buried at Arlington National Cemetery, but he came originally, he grew up in Glastonbury. There are many stories of the veterans, Jewish war veterans in the greater Hartford area. I'm going to bring you now to the current situation. So that's the historic nature, and there are many stories, many families, I'm sure, can share their stories, but the old Hartford cemeteries today are not generating enough income from the sales and burials to cover regular expenses and the mounting expenses relating to the challenges from the inner city neighborhoods. The Hartford cemeteries not only have landscaping costs, but also regular acts of damage and trashing and illicit activities resulting in regular and expensive cleanup charges. Property damage is a regular event. Fences, monuments, littering, vandalism occurring on a regular basis, particularly in the Zion Hill area of cemeteries. Tower Avenue, Zion Hill, and Mall Avenue are the three areas that are experiencing regular expenses due to the challenges of the neighborhood. Social issues of homelessness, drugs, prostitution, alcohol, anti-Semitism, and Lisa will tell you a story about occult activity that caused desecration of a grave at one of the cemeteries. The cemeteries have to be inspected multiple times per week, especially in the summer. Safety and security to cemeteries are regular risks. Less than a handful of people today are involved in actually going to the cemeteries and inspecting and reporting. There is no next generation of young people getting involved for the future perpetual upkeep. Volunteers are needed. Gates at this point need to be locked and are locked in many cemeteries. The police are stretched thin and they are not social workers. The issues that exist are daily, reoccurring problems. My father used to tell me that grandchildren don't usually know where their grandparents are buried. It's even a bigger problem today because so many of our young people have left the area. There have been some disinterments have occurred to move individual family plots out of Hartford to what are perceived as safer suburbs. Damaged monuments are often left without family intervention. Descendants are not around or unknown, putting the burden on those managing the cemeteries. Today, what's occurring in terms of the demographics and choices, the most popular choice for unaffiliated Jewish burials today is the cemetery known as Hartford Mutual Society in East Granby. That's next to that Simsbury Airport. The Weathersfield area cemeteries, Avon cemeteries, and still Tower Avenue areas are active burial locations. But the Tower Avenue area is now experiencing more damage and problems due to the social upheavals and the socioeconomic issues in that area. The Association Cemeteries, and I'm referring to the Association of Jewish Cemeteries of Greater Hartford, are now under Lisa Vaith, who is the director of those. They total about 30 in number. I'll let Lisa talk to you about those cemeteries. But Jews are now experiencing the interfaith marriages and are choosing with more frequency non-denominational cemeteries like Fairview Cemetery in West Hartford. One cemetery, Beth Hillel Memorial Park in Bloomfield, has a dedicated and separated section for interfaith burials. We need to encourage donations to the Association of Jewish Cemeteries when a burial occurs there. I, as a funeral director, am going to be encouraging families to list as a source for donations the Association of Jewish Cemeteries. The perpetual upkeep is using up funds that just aren't being replenished. We need to educate the youth as to the history of our Jewish cemeteries. Let them learn about the soldiers, the significant contributors to the development of our Jewish community. Let them learn about the tragedies, the circus fire. Now we've had COVID-19 impacting the burials at our cemeteries. So there are many aspects that are presenting new challenges, as well as the aging ones, the just natural deterioration of the burial sites. One of my hopes is that we can advance a multiple camera system to allow off-site monitoring. In fact, at Trinity College, I've been approached, and so is Lisa, to allow drone surveillance in the science class at Trinity, using our Zion Hill Cemetery as a monitoring site. So we may even see drones in the future. But Lisa will talk to you about how we're not just operating in a separate arena. We are regionally connected with other Jewish federations sharing the same experiences. I just dealt with a cemetery in Bristol, who Lisa referred me to, and their records were typical of many of the cemeteries that the association inherited. They were poor, to say the least. Some of the types of records that were passed down were in the form of like these kind, if you can see this, that I'm unraveling, just old records. Many people involved had to update, and I mentioned Louis Goldfarb and Rabbi Eddie Cohn. They went to meticulously listed the cemeteries, those who were buried there. They did a great job. I'd like to see the next generation doing similar. My father had amassed a lot of maps because he became involved in a larger group, not just the Edas Israel, but recognizing that the elders were no longer able to take care. This is a map from 1906 of the Zion Hill cemetery area. My father kept, it's just some of the ways that we were trying to stay on top of the situation that continues to challenge us. If anyone has ideas of how we can perpetuate the perpetual upkeep, please mention them tonight. I'm going to turn this over to Lisa Vayev now.
Hi, thanks, Len. As Len mentioned earlier, back in the 70s, the community became very aware that there were a lot of the sections in the different parts of Hartford, the cemeteries were not looking like they were being kept up. Many of them were started in the early 1900s. And by that point, many of the people who started them were no longer around. And they were the ones who would go on Sundays and mow the lawn with their kids and their grandkids. And when they weren't around anymore, that tradition really didn't stick. So in 1976, the Greater Hartford Perpetual Care Fund for the cemeteries was started. And at that point, there were only 6 cemeteries. And in the mid 90s, the Endowment Foundation, which is now the Jewish Community Foundation, they have been always holding the funds, and they wanted to get out of the day-to-day business of running the cemetery. So it was turned over to the Federation at that point, and there were a couple people who did it before me. Now we're up to 31 cemeteries. There's 29 in Hartford, 1 in the Elmwood section of West Hartford, and 1 in Meriden. And the one in Meriden has only been about a year now. They do have a completely separate interfaith section that members can purchase. So now we have about 20 to 30 burials a year now that we're including Meriden, because that's a much more active cemetery. Sometimes we have a disinterment, not often. And we have an average of 2 indigent burials a year, where the Federation will provide the plot and the perpetual care. And I work with a local monument company who will give me a foot marker at cost, and work with the funeral directors and with the grave diggers. And it's something really nice you can do for someone who has no one else. So we're really proud that we do that. What I do is I work with the funeral homes to manage the burials. And during COVID, it was a lot higher than all the other years I've been doing it. And I don't know that that's going to slow down, but I guess we will see. We are the lead organization to organize the police to come for Visitation Day. And it's not just for the Federation cemeteries, it's for all the cemeteries. They do it free of charge. We have a very, very good relationship with the Hartford Police, and it pays off because they are dedicated to us. I do weekly checks at all the cemeteries. Sometimes I see Len there. And then it's a lot of documentation of damage for quotes to have things fixed. I meet families if they want to purchase plots. And a lot of it is phone calls. People want to know where people are buried. And if it's not in one of our cemeteries, I can certainly direct them, and we can have photos taken and things like that. We provide a lot of genealogy information, which is something that everyone is very interested in nowadays. I also do photograph headstones and upload them to jewishgen.com and findagrave.com, which seem to be a great resource. And we attend all kinds of meetings. So we want to have our face out there. We don't want to just be the ones who complain about things. So we go to the revitalization zone meetings in the different districts where the cemeteries are. And that makes a big difference. The neighborhood block watches. People see your face, they say, can I have your card? And then they do call when they see something odd at an off hour. And it's been really helpful for us. And Len and I, and a group of other people, had to create rules and regulations for the cemeteries. And everybody, Len had maybe different ones than we had, but they were all pretty similar, and all for the safety of families and for the workers. We only have 6 grave diggers, or actually I think we have 5. And if something happens to them, we would certainly be in a lot of trouble. We have a lot of partners to help us with the Association of Jewish Cemeteries. It's not just us, it's the funeral homes are our partners. And like I said, the police departments of West Hartford, Meriden, and in Hartford. The Public Works Department in Hartford has been wonderful in, if someone leaves mattresses or appliances, I can take a photo of it on the 311 app that anybody can download, and you could say where it is and they'll get rid of it. And that has saved us a lot of money over the years. Now, if it's in the cemetery, it's a different story, but if it's on the outside, on the sidewalk, they're terrific. I also work with the Department of Development Services, the Division of Blight Remediation, because they really want these areas to be free of clutter, and it's something that's very hard for them to get on top of. I work with DEEP for the Bureau of Materials Management. We've had a lot of people dump hazardous waste such as large diesel tanks filled with diesel fuel right in front of the cemeteries, and they were very swift to pick those up. The Knox Foundation in Hartford plants trees near the cemeteries. They've been terrific. Hartford Community Service Court, I met them at one of my meetings that I attended for the Block Watch, and they offered to give us free help. So every other Wednesday in the North End, there's a group of about 8 or 9 low-level offenders, and they have a person there with them, a supervisor, and they're picking up trash. And they put it in certain bags with a certain sticker, and then the Department of Public Works will pick it up. And that's in conjunction with Community Partners in Action, which Deborah Barrows runs, and she is a former Hartford police chief. The traffic engineers in the city of Hartford, they've been very helpful with no parking signs and providing that, so we didn't have to pay for it. The Connecticut State Police, Brian Foley, is a huge cheerleader of ours, and he has really helped us with vandalism investigations. And then, as Len alluded to, there's all these other places. The Jewish Cemetery Association North America, I'm their former chair of the board, and this is hundreds and hundreds of cemeteries all over the place. Ones that are affiliated with synagogues, ones that are small like the ones I oversee, some that are for profit. Everybody's got the same issues, and it's nice to have a place where we have a forum and we have a conference and people can really put their heads together and come up with a lot of different options. The Jewish Community Legacy Project is out of Atlanta, and that's run by David Sarnat and Noah Levine, and that's partially funded by the Jewish Federation North America. And for free, they will come out to communities that have trouble with their synagogues are dwindling and they don't know what to do with their artifacts. And then, of course, the cemeteries and how to basically fundraise for that to keep those going. Let's see. Len did mention a lot of the challenges. The dumping is a huge problem, and we have put up more gates and we've put up different barriers across alleyways, and it's helped somewhat, but it's something that it's not just the cemeteries, it's happening all over Hartford and it's happening all over the country. So we try to stay on top of it as much as we can, because if someone sees a lot of dumped, all different types of mattresses, they're going to say, oh, that's a good place to get rid of mine. So we have to really stay on top of it, for that to happen. We also have found things like 60 or 70 tires that somebody dumped on Mother's Day. And the police department called me at 5 a.m. that morning and to tell me, because he was so upset. He knew people would be coming to visit for Mother's Day, and he was right. And they took it upon themselves to call in the public works guys to get rid of them for us, which, again, when you have the relationship, it pays off, because they certainly didn't have to do that. One of our most interesting finds was a stolen ATM machine that was in Zion Hill, and it had been taken from a nearby bodega, and it had just been filled with $20,000, and then it ended up in the cemetery broken open. And so it's things like that that we have to take care of. I don't know if they ever caught the people, but we do have a homeless population. Unfortunately, every big city has that. Sometimes they do take up residence in the cemeteries, and we work with the police on that to try to help them find housing, if or to find shelters if they wish. Let's see. The other challenge we have is a lack of maps. A lot of the organizations that we took over for, a lot of them didn't have a map. The map was sort of in the head of the person who ran it. And when he passed away, unfortunately, it was buried with him. So many times we have to go out, and the men from United States Cemetery, who are our grave diggers and our landscapers, they will come out and probe the area to see if they can tell if there's a vault there in the cases where there are vaults. Our administrative offices and our maintenance staff are off-site, so we're not there. It's not like Mount St. Benedict Cemetery in Bloomfield, where you have everything encompassed all in one. Not being on site has a lot of disadvantages. However, having the relationships with the community makes them the eyes and ears, and that's really helpful. I also wanted to mention that Carrie Shea, who is from she has started the Friends of Zion Hill, and they've really been working hard with a lot of other people to clean up all the areas, not just the Jewish areas, all the areas, and they've done amazing work, and they are definitely to be commended.
Lisa, thank you. You also had one incident at a cemetery on Tower Avenue that was unique amongst all, with the cult activity.
Which one? Let's say.
Where a grave was opened.
Oh, well, yeah, that was actually at a cemetery right next to ours, and it, someone did steal the body of a person who was buried about 6
And
years
that was in the last year.
That was in November, I believe, and it's it's believed to be some type of voodoo or Santeria where people do things like that. It's the same day, actually, there was a body stolen from a Catholic cemetery in Waterbury, and they do believe that they are connected. And the major crimes have still been working on that. We do have a lot of problems with voodoo. It's, a lot of chickens that are sacrificed and things like that. And I try to get to them before the family sees it. That's the most important. That's, our guys they're on top of it. And if I see it, I deal with it, because you don't want people to come across that. It's hard enough to go to the cemetery, and then to see something like that, it feels very personal, even though it's not meant to be from them.
Maybe we could have some questions now.
Great. I've seen thank you so much. That's really informative. I've seen a few comments and coming up in the chat. One sort of comment or question is whether in the Zion Hill cemeteries, is it still possible to get a plot there if that was something that somebody wanted?
Well, in that reference to Zion Hill, Beth Israel, the congregation Beth Israel, still has burials going on. I mean, that's an independent cemetery. You go through the office of the congregation Beth Israel. There are plots available. The desirability of buying a plot is something that has greatly diminished. I had a burial at a very old cemetery back in April, but I haven't had any sales of graves at the congregation Ados Israel over at Zion Hill in 20 years. It's really a historic area. I mean, there is a congregation of Gudas Achim, which is still privately run. They've had the worst cases of monuments being broken of all the cemeteries. It was a hidden spot, and a wall brick wall was taken down from chest high to knee high, and many of the monuments were fixed, and then it happened again. They were not broken. They were broken. So now many of them are just laying on the ground. That kind of impression turns anyone off from considering. And then the hotspot, there's a very particular hotspot which is being addressed, although it's still a really big problem. It is a deterrent to anyone considering purchasing a grave in that area. So we keep our fences locked at all times. There's a combination lock, 4 cylinders. People who want to visit know the combination, and then they relock the gates. And that's absolutely necessary. We've had monuments in large numbers knocked over and repaired and knocked over. And in the last maybe 8 months, there was an incident of about 30 monuments at one of the association cemeteries knocked over. So there's a reoccurring problem there of both vandalism and vice, and it's very, very visible.
As far as the availability of plots in Zion Hill for our cemeteries, I think we've had one burial there, and it was only because it was a plot that had been donated from a family, from someone who didn't have means. So we used it, and they wanted they wanted to go there. So that was really the only one. And most of these organizations were member organizations, so you had to be a member to have the right to be buried there. And as far as the is there room? There's some room in some of them, but not a lot. Beth Israel does, I believe, have room there.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if either of you could give any suggestions for people who are interested in finding out where their relatives or ancestors might be buried. I think you had mentioned the Jewish Gen website.
Jewish Gen, sometimes you can find things on Find a Grave. I mean, you can always call my office and leave a message, and I'll give you that number if anybody wants to write it down. It's 860-727-6143, and I'll be happy to help if I can. Also, there's a lot of free websites out there that will give you information. That Ancestry is pretty expensive, so you can go on, you can get a Connecticut State Library card for free, and they'll give you tons of information that you can access remotely.
One additional comment is sometimes you can just Google the name of the deceased, and it comes up. You may have to go to another site, but at least you get the initial reference to that decedent.
Thank you. So a question from Arnold about whether there's been outreach to area synagogues asking for volunteers to help the Jewish burial associations.
Well, I know that most of the synagogues have their own cemeteries that they've been dealing with, so not necessarily, but we're certainly open. I mean, for us, it's hard to have cleanup days and things like that with kids involved, especially if there's drug paraphernalia around. It makes it tough. But if other people were interested, I mean, sometimes there's fence painting and things like that. Len, what do you think?
Well, I would encourage, especially when there's so much time now at home, if someone wants to get out of the house, and if they would feel comfortable in a ride along, both wearing masks, I would, or if they can meet me if they're driving, I would work with them to begin to teach them about the respect that we give in the concept of kavod hachai, kavod hamet, honor the living and honoring the dead. We place stones at monuments, as you all know, to show that someone still cares. There's a lack of stones, I can tell you, on a lot of those monuments. So I would hope that it could become part of maybe an interest that also could involve a high-tech application, which I alluded to with cameras. Today, camera systems, you could have on your phone ability to monitor. And actually, I'm reviewing and trying to come up with that. It's extending a utility line, getting electricity nearby. But that would be a great project for the next generation, because that's what's needed. We all have been down the road of being the last one to like inherit the maps and the responsibility. And I can tell you, there isn't anyone coming after me within my group. So it's a big concern in terms of that legacy, and perpetuity is a long time.
Elizabeth, would you mind showing the chart of the cemeteries that Federation oversees?
Hold on just a sec. Y'all see that okay?
Yes.
Great. So, Lisa, maybe you can explain what's, if people aren't familiar with what a lodge is, or what some of these associations were.
So a lot of them, you know, they were people who wanted to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. It may have been that they were not necessarily very religious, but they wanted to be buried in Jewish cemeteries, very important. So they belong to different organizations. We do have some that are affiliated with Orthodox synagogues, but for the most part, a lot of it is just the different civic organizations out there. And you can find a lot of information about them in that book that Len spoke
Every
about
one of
earlier.
them, every one of them, it has a history
I have that book too. It's great.
in this book.
Or at the Historical Society. And I mean, some of them we don't have a ton of information on, but it is nice to, Hartford Sick Benefit. We have Lou Goldfarb, who wrote the other book that Lynn showed, and that was a cemetery that he was involved in before we took it over. So, you know, I can still lean on him if I have some questions about history, things like that. But the different areas are, you know, Cleveland Ave, that extension that you'll see, that's a little paved path that's in between. That's where we had a lot of dumping, and I was able to secure a grant, generous grant from the Jewish Community Foundation to gate that in. Fortunately, one of the gates has been driven into a few times, but we stay on top of things as much as we can. And the other thing is that we always try to get grants and apply for everything, and have stonework done by people who work and live in the community. And there's a lot of pride when that happens, and that's what we try to do.
Great, thank you very much. So you can see from this list the sheer number of different organizations and small associations that were really the sort of welfare system of the time, that ensured that people would have the funeral that they wanted.
Benevolent associations, yes.
Exactly, a mutual aid association. So that itself reflects a lot about the history of Jews in this region, for sure.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I have a question for Leonard. Is the Affleck Street entrance still open?
The answer is yes.
Good.
Okay,
Yeah.
when you say good, okay. There are people who drive in there who are unwanted.
Yeah, I assume. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
I had a question, if I don't have any others right now. Are the you mentioned visitation days. Are there what are those days? Just
So we have it's in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and it'll be in the morning. We'll advertise it. We don't have a lot of people that come anymore, but we do have the police there. They are not stationed there, but they do make a lot of extra patrols. If there's something else pressing going on, they will leave the area, but if not, they will do, they will sit there and help make people feel secure. I always encourage people to go in groups if possible, and to go early in the morning, and that seems to be the best protocol.
Thank you. If people have any more questions, please type them in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and speak, I think that would be fine at this point in time.
Any COVID-19 questions?
Would either of you like to just tell us a little bit about what the past few months what impact the past few months have had?
Well, I was a 9/11 responder back in 2001. Packed up a duffel bag with protective gear and went. Never did I think 19 years later that I'd be dealing with an environment called COVID-19. The impact was dramatic. It was personal. It was life-threatening. It changed just about everything that a funeral director was doing as a normally in the profession, in terms of our protective equipment needs, being uncertain as to exactly what causes of death we were dealing with, the sheer number of deaths that were occurring, unheard of in volume, dealing with town halls closing, making access to them unavailable, special arrangements, appointments, meeting in the parking lots, the way death certificates were being processed, the nursing home, the panic. It was a situation that I hope our area never sees again. And what it did, it changed the way we bury. And the protocols, Rabbi Tuvia Brander, who was the president of the Greater Hartford Rabbinical Fellowship, crafted protocols. There were situations where we just didn't know enough, and things were changing from week to week with revelations or opinions as to what could be safe. Social distancing, then masks, then discussions of how many people in attendance, CDC suggestions, Governor Lamont's suggestions, specialists on pandemic. It was a period of time that I will always remember as doing what I was trained to do, probably as best as anyone can be trained. And I was telling people back in April when I was supposed to attend APAC, and I was listening to reports on the pandemic, and I was telling people we should be putting masks on. And I remembered back at 9/11 how so many people, responders, didn't even have a mask on. And I was getting ridiculed and mocked and considered a fearmonger for telling people, you should be wearing a mask. Then, here we are. But each part of that crisis was giving us a feeling of waiting for a cause of death, pending COVID test, multiple showers every day, layers of protective equipment, then the anxiety of coming home. There was no getting away. Still, I mean, it causes anxiety. There are so many people that are anxious because of this. But as a field director, the switch basically for COVID-19 was turned off about maybe 3 weeks ago. It just stopped. I mean, now we're preparing, with protective equipment for possibly another round. And the burial protocols, maybe 5 people, well, CDC said 5 people in attendance, and Zoom. Here we are. I hadn't heard of Zoom, used it, but now the majority of funerals are with Zoom. And we're taking screening questionnaires and temperature at funerals, and people are wearing masks. Everybody's wearing a mask. So it's a real change that has impacted the funeral profession.
Thank you for sharing that, Len. We did have one specific question from somebody whose family has plots at Beth Israel Zion Hill that will not be used, and she was told that they could not be sold. Do you know if that's accurate?
That's up to each cemetery. We do not allow them to be sold. They can be donated to our association to be used for indigent burials. But if it's a large for-profit cemetery, many times you'll see people do advertise those, but it depends on the cemetery. It's
Sure.
uncommon that they would allow them to be sold.
So in this case, for Beth Israel, the best course of action might be for the family to donate them to the Association or Jewish Cemetery.
Well, no, they would have to donate it to Beth Israel because
to Beth Israel. Okay.
They're not part of it, because they're still an active congregation.
Oh, right, sure, of course. Thank you.
Their cemetery, yeah.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to say was that if people want information looking for graves. We have about 5,000 or 6,000 photos that a wonderful volunteer, Barney Miller, I'm not sure if he's on this call, but actually there he is. Okay, hi Barney. It took him years. It was a huge, huge undertaking. We have thousands and thousands, mostly at Zion, some over, and also at Mall, a couple from the cemeteries at Old North, and I believe Tiferes Israel and Beth Jacob in Elmwood. So people can email me. I can send photos. They're high resolution. They're great, and a lot of them he's taken different portions, different close-ups. It has been a lifesaver for me. It has saved me so many trips to the cemetery. I cannot tell you, and people really appreciate it, and they really want to see that everything looks okay.
That's an amazing resource. So thank you,
Yes.
Bethany. Yes. We did have one more question. What's the oldest Jewish grave that you know of in the Hartford area?
Well, if Lou Goldfarb is still listening, in his
Yeah, I think
publication, he listed at Beth Israel Cemetery, there was a 1740 grave at Zion Hill. Lou, are you still with us?
Yeah, I can unmute him.
Oh, okay. So he, in his book, by Eddie Cohn.
There he is.
I'm here. There's always been a discussion going on between Beth Israel and I believe one of the cemeteries in New Haven. New Haven says they have the oldest Jewish grave. But
What year? What year?
I could not tell you offhand.
Okay.
Ed and I
Okay.
walked cemeteries all over Connecticut and Massachusetts, and he did Rhode Island, certain parts of it. Our database had over 100,000 graves. Most of it is on Jewish Gen now in Jobar. And you could look that up. But as far as the oldest one, I couldn't tell you offhand.
Yeah,
Ed is the one that has a photographic memory, not me.
We have a lot of graves from the 1860s at the Eidos Israel at Zion Hill.
Yeah. But Tiferes Israel, you got to also remember, it wasn't always a Reformed synagogue. It started off as an Orthodox synagogue at one time, and they do have an old section there.
At which cemetery, Lou?
Tiferes Israel, not Tiferes Israel,
Yeah.
Beth Israel.
Got it. Right. Okay. Thank you.
One more question here. Do you ever do walking tours? This is a question from Carrie Shea of the cemeteries.
Directing to, well, I never do a walking tour. I mean, clearly I'm leading a lot of people in the funeral mode.
Right.
But you know, around the high holidays, there are many people who are asking about you know, visiting cemeteries, and I'm often like showing up to like give a person some feeling of security or just some direction. But I've never done a walking tour. Again, if there's anyone, if that's a way of getting young people involved or interested, I would do a walking tour. I'll do a drive along. I'll do another presentation like this. But we need the next generation to be a part of what right now the key people have in their control.
Thank you very much. I think that's probably a really good note to end on, but maybe that is something that we could explore in partnership with Jewish Historical Society if people are interested in having the chance to learn more about some of these cemeteries. That was in fact something that we had initially considered before the COVID crisis really put a stop to in-person programming, but perhaps there'll be a time when we can go back and visit in person as part of an educational program, and that might be a good way to advance some of the concerns that you're talking about. So thank you so much to our speakers. We really appreciate your time and your expertise, and thanks to all of you who joined us tonight. The recording for this, I will send out a link to for everybody in case you want to share it with somebody. certainly within the week. And thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all. Be
Thank
well.
you all.
Stay safe.
Thank you
Wear a
much.
mask. Okay. Winding down.
Yes.
Okay.
And says thank you to both speakers, and we certainly
Okay.
appreciate your time. So I'm gonna end the meeting right now.
Okay.
Thank
And,
you.
Beth, are others
Lisa.
still hearing us or?
Bye, Lisa.
yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so goodbye, good night.
Goodbye, good
Thanks.
night, thank you.
You're welcome.
Everyone.
It was my
Good
pleasure.
night, everybody.